So you just gotta pull it, and then out it comes. Definitely gonna have to get some transmission fluid. Welcome to the Trick Shift Garage. Today we are going to be working on CV joints. I'm right there. This CV joint, the rubber boot, busted open and has literally slung grease everywhere. So today I'm going to replace this one on the passenger side, but if time permitting, I'm going to replace the one on the driver's side as well. Alright, step one, you want to remove that cotter pin right there. Just grab a pair of pliers and straighten up the pin. Once you got the pin straight, just pull it straight on through. Let's see. Yeah, and it was a little bit tough, but eventually it comes out. There it goes. Alright, so that's done. Alright, the next step is going to be that spindle right there. That's a size 32 millimeter. And I got my big old air gun today. So just put it on there and it zips right off. That wasn't too bad. I thought it would be harder, but it was actually pretty easy. Alright, the next step is to pull off this clip that holds the brake line in place. The easiest way I found was to take the flathead screwdriver and just pry up a little bit on the ends, and then use it to hit that side, and then it pops off, just like so. And that comes out. All right, so the next step is to grab your 21 millimeter, and I use my air gun again. We're going to loosen up these two bolts that holds the strut on. It took a while because the air pressure wasn't building as much as I wanted it to. And if you don't have an air gun, a breaker bar would be fine, or even an electric impact wrench, that'd be fine too. Whatever you got at your disposal. Alright, once you got them loosened up, you can just tap them on out. But I decided to leave one in for now, so that way it would stay in place, so I can work off the CV joint. As you can see, we're breaking it loose, and now I'm going to pull the bolt out, holding it, and then slowly pulling back. Just be careful when you pull it out. You don't want to damage any bushings or seals that hold the grease in. Alright, so now that we're inside, we have two bolts right here that we need to loosen and remove. That is what holds the actual axle in place and keeps it from sliding in and out. These two bolts can be difficult to reach. If you have a long extension, preferably a 3/8 inch extension, the one I had was like 2.5 feet long, so I was able to reach it all the way from the outside of the car. But use whatever you can at your disposal. It's going to be a 13 millimeter there, these bolts are. Just loosen them up and take them right on out. Oh yeah, and that one got stuck right there. I just had to knock it with the screwdriver for it to fall through. No biggie. And this one on the bottom can be difficult if you have a long extension like I did. I kind of had to weave in through between the wheel hub and the brakes and everything, but just try to get a good straight shot at it. That way it just makes it easier instead of trying to stick a wrench up there underneath the car. And I dropped that one too. Alright, so once you have that out of the way, you can just simply pull the axle out, and there was quite a bit of transmission fluid that leaked out, as you saw. And here I am pulling it out. Done with it, finally. Yeah, that's the point that it failed and slung grease all in the inside of the wheel well and on the engine. As you can see, this is the original one that came with the car. So it had about 195,000 miles on it. Okay, so the next step, now in this video I am also going to be replacing the wheel bearings, as I'm already in there. The first time around I was kind of feeling it out. I removed the caliper first and then I removed the rest of the brake assembly, but in hindsight I learned that it's just better to take the whole assembly out with the main mounting caliper bolts. You don't have to separate them like I did here, but I mean it still worked. The reason why I did that was because I was a little worried about the brake pads falling out, but it really wasn't a concern. These bolts are a 22 millimeter, and I just zipped it right out. That impact gun makes quick work of it. And then I conveniently dropped it. I kind of forgot the whole thing was literally rested on those bolts. And I just put the bolts right back in place there, just so I wouldn't lose them. And as you can see, the wheel bearing, when I was turning it, I definitely felt some grinding, a little bit of noise with it. So I knew that it was time for it to come out. And as you can see now, I'm hitting it with some liquid wrench, some PB blaster, and just let it soak there for a couple minutes. Try to work in, it makes it a little bit easier. You can also spray the front side of the wheel bearing as well. And now I'm going in, just those 4 bolts. I think it's a 17 millimeter, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Yeah, so it's around there. And right now I'm just loosening up all the bolts and then taking them out one at a time. Now, when you're loosening, just try to watch what you're doing in terms of like how much weight or pressure you're putting on that lower control arm. As you can see, mine didn't just come out, had to bang it out. And I had a dead blow hammer, really a ball peen did the job better. You don't have to do this if you're just replacing the CV joint, but in this video I'm replacing both. Everything needed to be replaced here. So yeah, if you weren't doing the wheel bearing, you could just put the new CV joint in, put those 2 bolts back in place, and be done. You wouldn't have to do this part, but this is a bit extra. Now I get the ball peen, I'm banging it up. Took a minute, but it wasn't too bad. And there it goes. All right. So next step is just cleaning up a bit what I can. Grab a brush, wire brush, and scrape around. You know, try to clean up some rust on the inside of the wheel hub. Yeah, and put some anti-seize over it. And this just helps it not stick terribly for the next person who ever takes this off. Just being courteous, I guess you can say. Yep. Just a light coating. You don't need to do too much. Alright. So, and take note of the back plate. See how it goes back. That's to allow the rotor to go on there. Make sure you have it in that same orientation. If not, when you put your rotor on, it's going to be rubbing on it. So just make sure you put it on the right way. All right. So I couldn't get mine in all the way. So basically here what I did was got a couple bolts started by hand at the top to at least hold the wheel bearing in place. And make sure you put a little blue anti-seize on there just to make it easier for the next time around. And so once I got those 2 bolts at least started, then I was able to put the other 2 in and screw in each bolt maybe a few turns at a time to try to push the wheel bearing or pull the wheel bearing in by tightening those bolts. Once you got them all tight and snug by going around as I did, there really is no actual sequence to it. I just kind of did it what I could. Once you got them all snug anyway, the plan is to just torque them down to the correct spec. Yeah, it definitely took a few minutes to get this right. Okay, there we go, torque time. So yeah, it is a 17 millimeter at 44 foot-pounds of torque. And I use my torque wrench and just turn it until you hear a couple clicks, and then you know you're good. Pretty straightforward. I did notice that when I was doing this, I don't have any wheel speed sensors. I kind of realized it at this point. I'm like, huh, I wonder if I even have any lock brakes. But anyway, so at this point, putting some anti-seize on the plate, the wheel bearing mounting surface, I guess you can say. A little bit's fine. You don't have to cover the whole entire area, but I just put some in there. And then put the rotor back on. Yeah, if you're just doing the CV joint, you don't have to do any of this part, but I just wanted to show it, the whole process. I wanted to show the whole journey. And I just put a couple lug nuts in, just to hold the rotor in place, so I don't have to sit there and hold it. That'll allow me to put on the rest of the brake assembly, the caliper back. And spray it down with some brake clean. Okay, next step is to put the brake caliper bracket back in place. And make sure, again, you use anti-seize compound, the blue one. And I'm just finger tightening it right now. Alright, now we're torquing it down to 98 foot-pounds. And again, this is a 22 millimeter. If you're having difficulty tightening it down to the full amount, what you can do is mount the wheel hub back to the struts and put the two bolts in place just to hold it still enough so that way you can tighten it. I didn't have to do that in my situation, but you can. Alright, now on to the caliper. And this is going to be tightened down to 25 foot-pounds using a 14 millimeter. Pretty straightforward stuff. Alright, so the next step is to spray the bracket there that's going to hold the axle in place. And I'll just use some brake cleaner and some rags and just wipe it down as best I can. And then this is the entrance to the actual transmission. I just wiped it up some. I didn't spray much around there. Didn't really want to get brake fluid inside the transmission, so I just kind of wiped it by hand. Made sure everything was in place. Okay, so now here we go. And let me tell you, if you have a buddy around, like I had Bob around to help me out in this part, it can be very beneficial because that axle is not light. Okay, especially when you're trying to thread it through the bracket and then actually insert it inside the transmission. Definitely helps to have a friend or a buddy nearby. Alright, so here I am. I'm making sure that little metal washer at the end where my hand is properly seated. That right there. You have to make sure that's in the right spot because that's what keeps the oil seal to stay in place. And then boom, there it goes. Now it's in place. Alright, so mind that notch that's on the bracket there. It needs to be on the top side. I don't know if it really matters, but I just had to go back and take look at the pictures that I took before to make sure it was on the top. So just put the notch back where it was. I don't think it matters, but just better be safe than sorry. Okay, so put the bolts in, tighten it down. This is going to be torqued down to 18 foot-pounds. It's not much. Since I used an extension that was like almost 3 feet long, I actually I think I put 20 pounds of torque on it, just because those extensions actually twist a bit when you tighten, so you want to add a little bit back. But 18 if you're just gonna be right next to it. Okay, so the axle's in place. Now we're putting it back into the wheel bearing assembly and the whole wheel hub assembly. It takes a little bit of finagling, but eventually it goes in. Just make sure that you do not damage the teeth on the spindle end of the axle going into the wheel bearing hub. As you can see, it's a little bit of a struggle, but eventually it pops into place. Okay, there it goes. And grab a bolt and slide it on in, and some blue thread lock to help it. For the other one, same thing. I'm just finger tightening in there now just to put it in place. Now once I got those in, then I'm going to go ahead and, as you can see, torque them down. Again, they're 21 millimeter size on both sides, so just keep that in mind when you're going back to tighten them. So here I'm just kind of using the torque wrench to just get it tight at least, and then once I have it snug a bit, then I would go back and then torque it down to the correct spec, which here is 133 foot-pounds. Yep, just a couple rotations and it clicks in. Get a couple test clicks and you're good to go. And then for the bottom one, same thing. Take your time with it, go nice and easy. Listen out for the click. You'll feel the click too, or a beep if you got an electric one. I do want to get one of those. Alright, so now we're putting on that brake line clip again, just to keep the brake line where it's supposed to be. Couple taps with the ball peen, and there it goes. Okay, spindle time. So I put a little bit of thread lock on that too, because why not? Better be safe than sorry. And as you can see, I did it by hand, only to, as I tightened it, I was feeling for any kind of irregularities, I guess. Like, it should be able to turn smoothly when you put the spindle nut on. You shouldn't feel any kind of binding or grinding. It should be relatively easy. And once you got it in as tight as you can, then you go back, again, 32 millimeter, and this is going to be torqued down to 92 foot-pounds. Pretty straightforward. Okay. So the axles that I got came with that lock washer. I guess that's what it's called. It's not necessary. What is necessary is the cotter pin. You must have the cotter pin in place. And then just put it in, and you can just bend it back like so. You just want to make sure the cotter pin doesn't escape at all, ever. Like that. And that was good. That was good to go. And another quick spray of some brake clean all around. And this side is pretty much done. Okay, on to the driver's side. And this is day 2. This was a 2-day job. The next day was colder, rainier, wetter. But this side is pretty much the same thing, but we're going to go through it again just to make sure, you know, you guys are good with it. This time around, I changed up my steps I did. I removed the whole caliper on this side because I learned from the day before, hey, I don't have to take the caliper apart like that. I can just take the whole thing off as one. Getting the brake clip off, knocking the camera at the same time. All right, get that out of the way and loosen up my bolts. The 2 bolts, the 22mm bolts. All right. It was a little bit tricky on finding a place to set the caliper, but I ended up jerry-rigging up this bungee cord, kind of wrapping around the piston, and that, I think it was a coolant line or something, just to hold the caliper in place. Whatever you can use. I mean, if you have a bucket, you can always put the bucket down on the ground and set the caliper on the bucket. A lot of people like to do that too, but it's really up to you. Whatever you have at your disposal. So, you take the spindle off, again 32mm, and I'm breaking it loose. And once you have the axle broken loose inside the wheel bearing, you're going to take off the 2 strut bolts again, same way as before. Nothing changes here, but I mean, it's just still good to show. So now I'm taking out the bolts. And I came across a little bit of a problem on this lower bolt. I don't know why it was binding. I was able to get the nut off fine, but the bolt just didn't want to come. So I just grabbed the impact gun, and in a second here, I guess I give it a little bit of a fight. But in the interest of saving time, I was like, oh, I'm not going to waste any more energy here. So I grabbed the impact gun and just lightly just kind of feather the trigger and just let it kind of unwind, and there it goes. So not a huge deal, but I mean, if you come across it, just, you know, use the tools that you have available in front of you. All right, so that's coming off, and I did break the axle loose with the ball peen, but apparently the rust on the outside of the spindle was keeping it from going all the way through. So I just had to go in and out with it a bit, and eventually it came through. It was fine. It wasn't that big of a deal. Okay, so in pulling this axle out, you want to make sure it's as straight as you can get it, and then give it a direct pull straight out. It took a little bit of time, I'm not gonna lie. It took me quite a few tries to actually get this thing to come out. In the interest of trying to keep the video as short as I can, I'm going to show a couple series here of me trying, but it definitely took longer than this. It was not as easy as I'm showing it here. Here we go. Yep, there it goes. So basically what's happened is there's a little lock washer, or I don't think it's called a lock washer, but there's a little like washer inside that axle. As you can see in the picture here, it keeps the axle from accidentally coming out, but it's a pain in the butt to pull out when you're trying to. And it's also a pain in the butt when you're trying to push the new one in. This took a while too. Again, you want to have the axle as straight as you possibly can. And a lot of tries and a lot of luck. Eventually it did go into place. But yeah, it was just a lot of trial and error and just trying to feel to try to get that washer to fall in. Yeah, 30 minutes later. Yeah, it probably felt that way. But eventually, as you can see, I got it in, and the way to know that you got it in, you'll feel it go, you know, it'll push in, but you also want to kind of pull it out, because that's the test to see if that locking mechanism, that's like a little washer that goes around the axle, is actually going to hold it in place. And if you can't pull it back out, then you know you got it in and you're good. All right, here I'm trying to show how close the axle is to the actual transmission. It's very close. So now I'm just trying to show that that's how you know you got it in. All right, so now we got that side done. Now we're simply putting this the axle into the new wheel bearing. As you can see, I replaced it. I didn't show it again just because it's pretty repetitious. I mean, it's the same thing on the other side. But yeah, anyway, once you get the axle into the new wheel bearing, you want to torque that down. I didn't show it, but you want to put the bolts back in the strut just to hold the wheel hub into place. If you look at the top screen, you can see half of the bolt showing before you tighten it. Okay, so here's the lock washer thing, and for some reason on this side it did not want to go in. I don't know why. I think it was just that washer lock thing I had was just not lined up properly. So I just ended up using the old cotter pin actually. As long as there's no damage, or it's not rusted, or it's not about to disintegrate on you, you can reuse cotter pins. It's not a big deal. So as long as it's in good shape. But I mean, if your new one works, by all means, use it. Mine didn't, unfortunately. Okay. So again, putting on the strut bolts. And we're going to zip these down, make them snug. Again, I really like the impact wrench. I think I'm going to get one. I really do think I'm going to get an electric one. Okay, 103 foot-pounds, 21 millimeter size, and just tighten them down nice and easy. I do apologize for the camera because it started raining around this point, I believe, and there was water getting on the camera. But just be careful if things are wet, like bolts and stuff. They can easily slide off. You could strip a head or threads or what have you. Just take it easy when you're tightening down things this tight. All right. Okay, again, more anti-seize. I feel like I say anti-seize in this video a lot. You don't have to go over the whole area, but get the main spots at least. And there's the rotor. And then we put the lug nuts on just to keep it from falling on me. Okay, so then once you got these on, the next step is going to be to put the caliper assembly, all of it, back in place. Here we go. And you want to make sure that the brake pads on both sides are where they need to be. Okay. Now grab one of the bolts. Make sure you got thread locker, of course. And just finger tighten that one in just to hold it in place. And here goes the bottom. Yeah, day 2 was not a very good day in terms of weather. The first day it was awesome, but day 2 was wet and cold and what you typically expect on a December day. And these caliper bolts, they get tightened down to 98 foot-pounds. Notice how this time I actually mounted the caliper, or I should say I mounted the wheel hub back to the strut to tighten these down. It makes it a lot easier. So if you want to do it that way, do it that way by all means. Okay, and then here goes the little clip to hold the brake line in place. A couple taps with the ball peen. Oh, there it goes. Okay, the next step is to use Nissan NS2 CVT fluid. I couldn't find that, so I grabbed AMSOIL 100% synthetic fluid. It works even better than the stock factory fluid, so by all means, why not? Why not get better fluid? And I lost fluid when I was pulling out the axles, and as you can see here, it's kind of fuzzy, but there's the line right there. You want to make sure you get between the 2 notches. I took about a half of a quart I had to use for it. But other than that, that's it as far as this job. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. See you on the next one.